Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is our fifth live stream talking about design system here with the Design System Social Club. Um, Today, I have two special guests to talk with about support with me. So, first of all, I have Katie. Katie was there before, but hello, Katie. You're
Hi.
muted, Katie. Hi. Katie is a hybrid. She is a designer and a developer. She's passionate about design systems. And did you start from scratch, Car Gurus, or was it there already? So, yeah, you
Yep,
helped
start from scratch.
building from scratch up until recently. And then right now you're in between jobs and you're going to start in the fall. But, that's all I want to say about it right now. And so I'm super happy to have you today with us talking about support. And then we have Isha. Hey, Isha.
Hi.
Isha is kind of like our superstar today because she not only was she working, she's also a hybrid. Actually, we're all hybrids here. We're all in good company. And by that, if somebody doesn't know, it basically means that we're both designers and developers. Is that a correct assumption?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Isha basically worked in Salesforce design system, and then she moved on to be at Twitch. You were like the big boss of the design system at Twitch, right?
I was part of the leads. I was leading the team. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you're leading the team. You're the big boss. You will be happy to know that we're actually streaming on YouTube and Twitch, so we're good.
Amazing. I love that.
And then finally, you joined very recently Square, right?
Yep. I
Same
started.
thing.
Yeah, I'm the design manager for that team. Yeah.
Cool, great. Well, thanks for coming to and talk with us today. It's kind of weird because you're like much smaller than us, so I don't know. It's gonna be funny. Yeah, I'm super big. Look at me.
I could be bigger too, but I'm just.
It's okay. Maybe Isha, would you mind, like, I don't know, like, I'm just super curious about, like your, as an introduction, like basically now that you are Square, like, and you were in hybrid before, maybe talk about, I don't know, like your experience with design systems so far and how, I don't know, you saw maybe an evolution between the three systems that you worked on.
Yeah, I think that it's been really interesting, starting my career in the world of like making style guides in Photoshop. And, at my first job, what it meant to like be building in Photoshop and Sketch and, designers having to constantly like upload new versions of this like style library, moving on to a place like Salesforce where they had a lot of engineering support. And so there was a lot of like automation. There were all of these tools built around supporting this design system ecosystem. And I think it was a really, like at that time, it just felt like the industry was blossoming. There were all of these different ideas about, how visual regression testing, like there just started even talking about stuff like that. After when I had joined, I think like 6 to 8 months before that, Gina, invented design tokens. Like it was a really interesting time. And I think being at Salesforce and being in the same room with a lot of people who are pioneering this design system effort, it was really cool to just kind of see how systems design was taking off and how it was benefiting so many people throughout, the company and the industry and everything. Going to Twitch, that was around the time where Figma started blowing up. And, we've really started using this new powerful collaborative tool. And like we were able to build entire systems around how to use that and be able to serve that to our design constituencies, and how, the handoff between design and engineering got a little bit easier. I feel like there's just been an evolution of tools. And there's just a lot more resources out there now. Like, when I first started out in the industry doing this type of work, there wasn't as much. There was like people didn't really have any real standards that they shared, across the design discipline. And now it just feels like there's so much support and there's so much there's people like us, like sitting in a room together, being able to like help each other and talk about our experiences and stuff. I think that's been really fun to watch.
Yeah. And then, so obviously Square is like super new, but can you tell us a little bit about your current team? Like how many people in the design system at Square, for example?
Yeah, so my current team right now, it's 2 designers, but about 12 engineers. And at Twitch, it was like, our design half was maybe like 6 or 7 designers, and then we had 3 engineers. So it's like the opposite at Square right now, but it's been amazing to like learn how they've been building their system out. Everything's really systematized on Figma. There's just all of these tools that everyone's using to kind of standardize things. And I think this is the topic that we're here to talk about, support and stuff like that. I think it's going to be a good one because that's a lot of what my role is going to be on this new team, like helping evangelize the design system, making sure that all the right things are in place, and not only playing support for my team, but playing support for the company at large and getting them bought in and making sure that everything that we're providing is useful for them. So it's a really, really cool time to be here.
Cool. Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Well, let's dive in. We were talking, like we wanted to talk about support for this episode because the last episode was actually on documentation, and obviously both are linked, right? It's like you can assume that the better your documentation is, the less support you need, in theory, at least. But I'm just throwing it out there because I want your reaction. What do you think? Like, at the same time, I feel like if you have no documentation, people will have a lot of questions, right? So, and I also want to say that, I don't know, in my mind anyway, I feel like, like if you get the same questions over and over again, it's probably where you need to provide more help and more documentation. But I guess to me, like documentation is basically something that is always available that you can look, and then support is actually more like a ad hoc conversation, right? But what's your overall feeling, Isha, about it? Or Katie, actually, because I'm sure Katie was, your experience is probably slightly different, but I also want to hear what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I'm coming at it from kind of like the sole practitioner perspective where I didn't really have a team. I had a couple people kind of helping out when they could. We never really got a chance to build like a full team around it. So, and I'm also not working there anymore. So I've had time to kind of reflect on and also like leaving a job, you have to do a lot of documentation and like knowledge transfer. So I'm thinking about
if you're a good professional, right? If you're a good pro, you do it. So good for you, Katie.
Yeah. So there was like a lot of videos. I was like recording just walkthroughs of stuff that I never was able to document, and doing like Zoom meetings and just like walking through stuff with people to try to get stuff out of my head. But the thing that made me like make a face when you said documentation should be able to solve for a lot of this, people don't read. So I think that you kind of need both. Like you definitely should have everything really well written and documented, which is something that I really enjoyed and was good at. But I never got around to like maybe doing some automation around like keywords in Slack that people ask could like pull up a specific document or something, because they just need to be sent to the exact place that they need to read. If you just say like, just go read it on the wiki or whatever, they probably won't find it. So you need both written documentation and like either a person or a bot to like help get them to that documentation to read it.
By the way, when I say documentation, it doesn't have to be just written text, right? It could be, I don't know, it could be a video, it could be a chatbot, it could be, like something that is somewhat always available and prepared in advance, I guess, compared to what I would call, but like a chatbot is an interesting thing. Would you consider it documentation or support or both?
I guess it depends.
Yeah.
Speaking of the chatbot thing, that's something that I built at Salesforce while I was there. So me and another teammate, we partnered on trying to solve that problem of like, okay, in our support Slack channel, we always get asked like these same questions. Wouldn't it be so great if like there was just an automated answer that was pulling from the documentation So we did explore that towards the end of my journey there. And it was interesting because, like, it's, you want certain things to be automated, but at the same time, you want to maintain a culture of trust. And, you want to make sure that your constituents feel like you are there for them and you're there to help them. Usually the sentiment that I experienced in just kind of going through that process was like, people don't want a bot. Like, people don't want a bot to tell them. People want answers from real humans. It's like, when we call the pharmacy or something like that, and we have to go through like this automated thing when it's like, I need to talk to a human. Like, I just need to get my question answered.
Yeah.
That experience is really mirrored also in the work that we do. And so it felt very like, it didn't feel like the investment made sense to kind of automate those conversations. If anything, like making the documentation site a little bit easier to understand, making sure that there were context clues in all the different places that people would need to find them. So if a designer's in Figma, making sure that like there's actual examples and there's some documentation in the Figma itself so that people don't have to go to like the separate website. People don't have to like read through paragraphs, like the context clues are all there. It felt like it made more sense to invest in that. And then also just in planning our time for the week, just knowing that some percentage of time was going to go into one-on-one support with people. And it was worth doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And to be clear, I think that support cannot be like, there's just like one tool that will actually answer that problem, right? It's like it's probably like, yeah, maybe you have a chatbot, but you also have office hours, and maybe you also have like, I don't know, like a Slack channel for ad hoc conversations and stuff like that. And sometimes you jump on a Zoom call or whatever, what have you, because like you need to talk about it. But yeah, to me, like it's a super complex area. But here's another maybe question, but thought provoking, like to just provoke thinking around that, is that I think that, like a design system is either a startup or a product in itself, for its own company. And that means that probably as a product or as a startup, you need to have some kind of, like support team or customer success or something like that. So I see you nodding, so I'm guessing we're all on the same page, but in your mind, who should be that support team? Who has the job to do that? Because let's be clear, usually it's not like we have like 40 people working on the design system, and so we can specialize. So most of the time, it's actually, like whoever did this thing. But, it's like, yeah, it's not because you're great at, like building a component that you're great at supporting other people, right? It's like, it's not because you're good at math that you're a good math teacher, right? So do you have any perspective on that? Like, do you feel like you had to, I don't know, like maybe it depends. It all depends on the scale also of your company, I guess. But do you ever think about those things?
Yeah, I think, so what I found on like design systems team specifically, that's really interesting is like, it is a service oriented team. Like I often, and I've gotten, negative feedback about this, but I like to think of a lot of design systems teams as like, we're kind of the janitors of design. Like we're keeping everything tidy. We're making sure that everything is running smoothly. Like and not everyone can be a design systems designer. There is like some level of selflessness to it where it's like, I'm just building tools so that you can do your job better. And so what I found is like the nature of people who end up on design systems team, for the most part, they're all really excited about how, like the main reason why they're on the team is because they like helping people and making stuff to help people. So because of that, they are already like on board with wanting to support people and wanting to give them the time to help them get through a problem, which I find really awesome. Most of the people that I've worked with, especially like, most recently at Twitch, everybody on our team played support. And you did mention a little bit like, the person who worked most closely on a thing usually ends up like jumping in to help about that thing. So like, the designer that designed the buttons, if there's a question about a button, generally they would be the one to answer that question. But I think I've maybe only experienced like one person throughout my career who worked on a design systems team who was like, I hate supporting people, because it's like, that's your job. Like what you're doing is supporting people. So I think it's a shared responsibility between everyone, and it should never be. Hopefully we never go into a world where it's like we have pager duty or something like that for designers, where they're getting like
we do
on call
for designers.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, not for designers, but we're thinking about it because, it's like, hey, we have, so basically, and for the people that don't know, I work at Intuit for IDS. IDS is supporting over 400 designers, over 4,000 developers. So basically we're talking about like, there's potentially a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And so, like it's like, yeah, we have somebody that is on call basically for support, like on our Slack channel at least. And we're more and more thinking about that. Like it started for the developers because developers usually are used to it, but we're starting to say, hey, designers, like like for us at IDS, like everything else, it has to be thought across 6 themes, 3 platforms, and then it doesn't necessarily like, you don't care about too much about like light mode, dark mode, but basically, it's like, it's not because like you're, let me just give you an example. Like if we have somebody that asks a question around QuickBooks, it's like, cool, but is the designer like, or designers working on the design system basically needs to have like a really broad understanding of the products and not just theirs, because usually they're embedded designers coming from, like maybe QuickBooks if we're lucky, but maybe the person on call has the bandwidth is actually, like working on Mint. So, it's like there is like really like this problematic of like being really aware and being able to answer questions and not just say, we'll have to get back to you on that, which is better than nothing if somebody at least acknowledged the question. But you see what I mean? Like it's definitely, at that scale, it is a problem, and we do need to have like some kind of designer and developer on call. But actually sparks a question in me. Do you see a difference between supporting developers and designers? No? Yes? What do you say?
Katie, you could go ahead.
Sorry, my computer's, I think I'm freezing up a little bit.
No, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you hear my question?
Yes.
Okay.
I do think there's a difference. Well, one thing that's just kind of like popping into my mind right now are code reviews, like just basic code reviews, not related to design systems necessarily, but that's kind of a way at CarGurus we had code owners. So certain teams would actually be pinged on like a code, a pull request if they owned that code or if it's something that their team worked on. It's kind of the same thing with design systems. You own that code, so you're probably the best people to be reviewing any like additions or pull requests there. So I just wanted to bring that up because it kind of reminded me of that. But as far as like supporting designers, it's different. There aren't code reviews, so it's like a different process as far as if it's like designers who want to contribute or if they are using a component that they want to change, which is very common. So something that we did at CarGurus, because I wasn't on the design team, I was kind of like the liaison between engineering and design. I would attend their daily stand-up. So just the design team had basically a stand-up where they would take like 15 to 20 minutes to kind of talk through whatever they're working on that day. And as the design systems person, I would just like approach those reviews through that lens of like looking for components, looking for future components that we didn't have yet, or seeing that they've changed something in a component or used it in a different way. Most commonly answering if this thing should be a button or a link, because that was like the most common question every single time, and explaining the difference and talking about interactions. So I feel like the design support portion was much more hands-on in a way, like it was a bit more face-to-face discussion, whereas like engineering support often happened through code review, like through a PR or through like a Slack conversation.
Yeah, on that note, I'd say like, and this could be controversial, but I think supporting developers is far more objective, and supporting designers can be a little bit more subjective. So usually, an engineer will be like, did I like implement this component properly? Yes or no? If the answer is no, like, how do I implement it properly? It's very like straightforward. You rarely have someone being like digging into the implementation details, being like, I don't like the fact that you use this div here. Like, no one cares, whereas when it comes to design, you have to kind of walk a fine line of being like, I think, if someone's using a component incorrectly, or using a component that you don't want, or they're not even using a component and you want them to, it's very much like having to make the case for why they should be using the design system. You can get pushback, like, I don't like the way it looks, or I don't believe that that's like the UX that it should be. And there's a lot more subjectivity. There's a lot more like making sure you maneuver the conversations better. I'd say supporting engineers is like just quick and easy. Supporting designers can be trickier.
Totally agree with that. Just like talking to an engineer, you're like, just add this prop, and they're like, cool, done. Talking to a designer, for me, I ask a lot more questions to try to get them to kind of come around to where I'm coming from, rather than just come in and be like, that should be a button. I'll be like, well, what do you want the result of this? What happens when you click this? Yeah.
So I have actually, personally, in my experience, a very common pattern is more like the developer coming to like asking a question in the support channel and saying, can I change the size of this? Or can I change the color? How can I change the color of that? And so basically it's a thread. It's like, why do you want exactly to change that thing? Who asked you to change that thing?
And then the designer gets pinged on it, and then
and then it's like, did they get approval from the end of the designers that should tell them that it's actually not okay to change that thing, And so, it's basically we're pulling like a lot of people in. It happens all the time, And so basically, and it's it's human nature, like usually a developer, is not necessarily pushing back when they say not part of the design system, won't be doing this thing. Thank you very much, So I'm not saying that's what they should do, although maybe if they knew the design system, they should be able to talk with their designers. And I want to say super early, if possible, to say, hey, by the way, there's like a lot of things on your mock that is not part of the design system. Are you sure this is where you want to go? So, but yeah. And so, yeah, this is what happens, I think, a lot of time for me, at least, or like in my experience. So anyway.
That's something at Twitch that we were trying really hard to build a culture of making sure that the communication happened from every direction. So engineers felt empowered to push back on designers when they saw that something wasn't using the design system. And our team actually spent quite a bit of time evangelizing the design system to the engineers to make sure that they were aware of what components existed, how they should be used, like what patterns they should expect, so that conversation could happen from the other side too. Because it is very frustrating when you go to the support Slack channel and then there's a person who's like, how do I get this really random implementation of this component, and we're just like, oh god, this is going to be like a whole conversation now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, it reassures me a little bit that I'm not the only, we're not the only one, but I thought so. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So maybe let's change slightly the subject, but let's talk about tooling and what are the tools that you put in place actually for like in your mind to have like an effective support. Because like we talked about, like somebody has a question. My guess is you have in one form or another what I would call a Slack channel, right? Like somebody is coming in asking a question. Although this, interestingly, I think like some people might not dare to ask a question because it's public. And I had that feedback before, that if it was anonymous, then they will be less shy to actually ask a stupid question, when actually it's like, oh, nothing is stupid. Like you don't know what you don't know. And, like ideally we work in a place where, you know, like you can be vulnerable and say, I have no idea, and that question, right? But apart from, you know, that is kind of like pretty much the first idea. But in your mind, we talked a little bit also about Slackbots, but any other things that you think are support tools in your mind?
Well, like I said before, I didn't have really any tooling. I was the tool, and that was I don't know if I'm
You're
going to call
such
myself
a
a tool.
Okay.
That's kind of like what I'm reflecting on, and wishing that maybe I had invested more time in trying to like create multiple me's to answer people and to support people. But I also did do office hours, which I consider a tool in a way, like we kind of talked about earlier. Being the only person that was really ever supporting people, I was conscious of my time and tried to like give people an opportunity to come talk to me face to face over Zoom. Started out once a week, went to every other week because it was really hit or miss. Sometimes the whole chunk of time would just be like packed with people, and sometimes it would be empty for weeks. But that was like, I guess I consider that a kind of a free tool. It's like an easy tool to implement if you're a team of one and you don't have the capacity to build anything. Just think about like reorganizing your time and, you know, slotting out time to talk to people one-on-one is something you can do as a solo.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I think office hours are great, and they kind of in going back to like the person who would feel more comfortable being anonymous, they are like a great, you know, safe space for people who don't want to ask questions publicly, but they still want help. It's really easy to get that like one-on-one FaceTime. And it's a really great way to protect your team members' time in general, because as a design systems team, you know, there is the support Slack channel or channels, but there's always going to be people pinging, you know, the person directly. And I was always a big advocate of like, if the question is going to take more than like a minute to answer, direct them to office hours, because you need to be, you know, precious with your time. And also what you could be answering could be helpful for the whole team to hear so that they can, you know, answer the same questions in the future. So I think that that's a really good avenue. Documentation sites, obviously a great avenue. Baking that documentation into Figma itself as well, making sure that you comment the code so that like, if you have a bunch of props on a component, they're labeled really well so that people, you know, understand what's the difference between the label prop and the description prop. Like it's, you know, outlined there for the person. That was basically what we did at Twitch for the most part. Like that was our main, and then, you know, having like brown bag sessions, getting the team involved in engineering onboarding so that there was a session about the design system and onboarding so that all new engineers knew what the design system even was and where to find it and stuff like that. Constantly having, you know, like the mobile engineering team would have monthly show and tells. So showing up there and like talking about the design system. We would have like engineering summits. We would have like, you know, bi-weekly design reviews and stuff, or design all hands, and making sure that we were consistently like involving ourselves in all of these places and talking about relevant topics was really, really important. And I think the best thing is to always just have FaceTime with people, with like the company at large, and just have less of the robotic automated stuff, more of the like, hey, we're real people, we're building this tool for you, like we just want to help you however we can make your job more efficient. So feel free to reach out. And even just doing that like goes a really long way and makes people feel comfortable using your system. So that was mostly what we did at Twitch.
I feel like that kind of shifts too, like depending on the age of your design system. Like at the beginning, like we kind of talked about earlier, it's kind of critical for you to just like always answer all of the questions and be as available as possible and make sure that people feel like this is legit and I can rely on this and it's not going to just, you know, go away overnight.
Right.
But then there's like a breaking point, not necessarily a breaking point, but there's a point where you start to have more questions than you can answer, or like the more questions you're getting, kind of show you that you need to build X, Y, and Z, because like you're just getting these same questions and you're kind of like falling behind on being able to support them in a way of giving them the tools that they need rather than answering the questions or giving them a workaround because you don't have the tools they need. So that's like the point where it's time to, you know, advocate to have more people on your team so that you're not the only person answering questions and building the thing so that you can catch up and not have to, like, that will help solve some of the questions that you're getting ideally.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, automation sounds great, but what sounds better is more headcount.
Yes, agree.
If only.
Yeah.
But no, it's true that, like, you know, like one of the things that I'm trying to push more and more in my team personally is also the fact that carve out time with like documentation and communication. And so that's pretty large, but obviously we always have like so many things that we want to build, right? We're builders usually, you know, like whether you're a designer or a developer or a hybrid, I don't care, but usually we like to build stuff. It's great that at one point you need to document what you build and you need to communicate what you build. And I think that, you know, like Isha, to what you were saying earlier, I feel like at one point, if you don't want to be overwhelmed by so many questions because people are trying to understand, is that you have to be proactive and start creating educational content.
Yeah.
So that means onboarding. That means, you know, like going back to people and say, hey, we have like a workshop, and would you be interested in like attending this thing? Maybe, you know, like going to certain teams and say, hey, like, you know, like we have, you know, like all this material that you can use so that proactively they learn about it and not just have like tons of questions because nobody wants to read the user manual.
Yeah.
Right. So that means time, that means resources, and yeah, ultimately that means probably more people. But as we stated at the beginning, I feel like most design systems are startups. So you start with one person and then three, but then, you know, it's like you're always catching up because. So anyway, here's actually a related question, but in your mind, do you see like any ratio against, you know, like, let's say, you know, like how many people should be working on the design system versus product? Have you ever thought about it this way? Because like, to me, like at one point, you know, sometimes we talk, like in companies, you talk about the ratio between designers and developers, but I would argue that we should probably also think about like how many people should be working on the design system versus products and features. Do you have an opinion on that? Have you ever thought about this?
At Salesforce, our team was so small. It was like 6 people, and we were servicing. It's kind of, you know, it's like Intuit where it's like there's 30,000 people and you're servicing all of them, and also this like huge developer ecosystem that's building on top of Salesforce and all that. So, you know, there was not that many people on that team. At Twitch, we had about like 10 people on our team. Now at Square, it's, you know, like 14, 15 of us. I think it's like you need as many people to be able to do all of the things that you need to get done. And however many that means based on what your needs are. Like, you know, it sounds like Katie could have used a hand.
4?
And that's
4 people.
So, you know, it's like at that point, that's when you're like, okay, clearly there's a demand and we're not able to meet the demand with just one person. So let's like scope out what all of the different needs are and make sure that we have somebody who can, you know, we have enough people to meet those needs. I think it's really important to be aware of what those needs are. Like, you know, when you're just starting out, maybe somebody working on, you know, developer onboarding is not a useful, you know, use of their time. But, you know, once you're 3 years in to a design system, then maybe that is worth someone's time. Maybe then it is worth, you know, having a copywriter on your team. Maybe then it's important to have a motion designer on your team to like really get into the granular nitty gritty, you know, expanding the system to the best potential that it could have. But it really just depends on what the needs are. I don't think that there's, you know, at Salesforce, 6 people was fine. At Twitch, you know, 11 people was not fine. We needed more people. At Square, it's like we have all these engineers and we just have 2 designers. So it's really just a reflection of like, you know, there were clearly needs and this is how they met them.
Yeah. That said, I'm yet to like hear about a design system that is too big. Like, yeah, we're just too many people, right? Like, I never heard that problem before. So
I don't think I've heard that either.
Cool, but yeah, I mean, like there is what I would call, and forgive me, this pop culture, but it's like the 300 syndrome, right? Like you can be like the best warriors in the world if you're like outnumbered. Like there's just so much you can do. So
Yeah.
like it's frustrating, and then you start to lose people because they just get frustrated because they don't have ways to be successful. So I don't know, maybe that's why Katie left.
Well, I will say, as the lead, I put a lot of effort into thinking about how I would scale the team. And Nathan Curtis, I just read all of his stuff. Like he helped me through like doing everything alone.
Who doesn't read Nathan Curtis?
But he's got a lot of good stuff on like teams and different team models. And I just basically read through all of that and thought about what kind of work could I have other people doing that I'm doing now that would free me up and, give us more resources basically for what the teams were asking for. So there's, I think for a company like CarGurus, I think we were serving a couple hundred engineers and a handful of designers. Just like having 3 people would have been really nice, would have been pretty comfortable for that scale, and definitely like a full-time designer. So it's the opposite problem where we're mostly engineers and not enough designers. You definitely start to feel that like a year or 2 into building a system that was basically a code-first system. You really need to start supporting the design team that's growing. So having a full-time designer is, I think, key, even on a small team of 3.
Yeah, no, for sure. Makes total sense. Just to complete on tooling, so at Intuit, basically, we do have office hours and, Slack channels, stuff like that. I think we should be better at actually creating more educational content. We have several websites actually, plus, like things like storybooks and stuff like that, but I would not call them technically support. In the support land, we tried to integrate Stack Overflow to Slack. So basically, if the questions were asked before, you could have like an automated response or something like that. For whatever reason, we never really got momentum on this. So it still exists, but I honestly don't know who's using it. And I know that we're trying right now to integrate a chatbot in Slack, but it was not, it's still like super early, so I don't necessarily have like feedback on this. But Isha, to your point, I feel like, it's like documentation is probably the driest solution, it's like, and then a chatbot is maybe a little bit better. You can ask a question and you get an answer. I don't know if you can be like happy. And then, like the deluxe thing is you really have a real human helping you out into your thing. But, I feel like there's maybe like different things that you can put in place that has obviously, ask for less resources, but that still be able to help. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. There's another thing that we're trying to do right now is, we are very, we have a belief basically, and I think it's a strong run for us, is to meet people where they are. So basically, ideally, we want to be able to answer questions or get to documentation where, in Figma for designers, or like in an IDE like VS Code or something like that. So like if you were able to ask a simple question and get an answer, I think that would be great. At the same time, I feel like some things are not meant to be just a simple, like there's not a simple answer to it, right? It's like, for example, like if your answer is the value of a design token, easy, like for AI or what have you, it's like, yeah, like you want the exa value of like this color, yeah, cool, easy. But then it's like, if it's, as we said before, it's like, can I change this thing? Well, it's way more complicated than that. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of documentation / support is inside of Intuit, one question that we have time and time again is, can I use this thing? And it is a very complex answer. It depends. It's like usually when I say, can I use this thing, is that, can I use this component? And we have a lot of different component libraries that are supported by different kind of people, supporting or not different themes. So basically, we are thinking about creating some kind of tool that would be a can I use, for our design system, because we cannot just answer you yes or no, but we could potentially show you the lay of the land, like with a table, and saying, well, this component has an implementation for this platform, this platform, this platform, for those teams, and we have it in the Figma library, and we have a documentation for it, and a storybook, and like a code repo. But those things are all like not necessarily on par, and depending on which version are we talking about, and things like that. So this is something that we're thinking about. Maybe one day I can show that when it's ready. But it's like the whole, like, it depends. And like basically in our team, there's like one person that I know would know, but we cannot scale her. So it's like she knows, and she's a hybrid, because hybrids are the best. I'm just saying. But like she knows as well the Figma libraries as like the component libraries, and so she can tell you, oh yeah, and plus she has the history, so she can say, oh yeah, so this component, let's say you want a date picker, she will be able to say, okay, so depending on what feature you want, you should pick this one or that one or that one, but careful, because this one, nobody touched it in the last 6 months or something like that. But so yeah, what do you think of this idea of like a can I use for all the components?
It sounds hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Super hard.
That's for any of these things, like, even the chatbot, even for like something like this, it's like you need somebody creating the content, you need somebody maintaining the content, you need somebody, yep. There's a bug in the whatever, in the implementation of this new thing, you need somebody to fix that. You need, it becomes like a whole project that you have to maintain. And ultimately it's like, you just have to consider the costs versus like the returns, right? Like if it ends up being super useful for the whole company, definitely invest time in it. But it's so hard to know when these things will take a lot of time to build and then a lot of time to maintain, like how much you're really getting out of it.
Yep. No, for sure.
That's cool, though.
Yeah. Well, what I can tell you is that we have that question over and over again, and it's never simple. It's never, straightforward. Like, it's like, talking about how much completion do you have on this component implementation? And you're like, well, there's just so many different ways that I can answer to that question. It's like, yeah, it's there, but it's there just as a Figma component. It's in the Figma library, but there's no code behind it. So do you consider it done? I don't think so, but you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, cool. Well, I mean, we've been chatting around this thing for like a good, I don't know, like something like 45 minutes, but do you have any questions? Or maybe if somebody in the live audience have any questions, this is the right moment. I don't know. Katie, Isha, do you have anything you want to ask?
I have a thought. I feel like this conversation has made me think that just having more people like supporting a design system is actually more beneficial than all of these cool tools that we could be building. Because just like reflecting on my time at CarGurus, I think all I needed was just a couple more people to kind of rotate through support. So like somebody has the Slack channel for a day and they're fielding questions. And because I was really interested in writing documentation, like, documenting all my decisions that we made as a team or that I made individually, that's something that your team can all reference. So you can almost have like your public documentation and then your private documentation where even if, you're not the person that implemented whatever component or made a decision, if we're all referencing this documentation and then being that key support person for the day, it's kind of like best of both worlds. Like you have your documentation and you have your face, your person, your human being, like supporting the other people at your company and making people feel safe and secure in your design system. So I really like that perspective on it. It's something I hadn't really thought about before.
The only problem, Katie, is that headcount is expensive.
Yes.
It's usually more expensive than having a tool or like buying a service, like a third-party service.
Not as expensive as losing the only person on your design systems team who's keeping the car running. So
very true.
Yeah, so it's definitely, I think in my experience thus far, like at Twitch, our design system was incredible. Our team was incredible. And a big part of why it worked so well was because everyone was willing to always take the time to support people. You know, like our designers would, like, if a product designer had a question, they would get into the Figma with them. They would, you know, make examples for them. They would like go out of their way to really support those designers. And with engineers, like if engineering had a question that wasn't like a simple answer, our engineers would like hop on a call with them, get into their code, like really help them out. And if you want your system to succeed and you want people to adopt it, it's almost like you have to go out of your way to do these little things so that they want to keep coming back and they feel like, okay, like using the system won't actually slow me down, because if I do ever have a question, they're going to be really quick in helping me with it. And like, yeah, there's no way that, you know, that can scale with just a few people. And so ideally, you know, leadership in whatever form it is like meeting the team halfway and is like, we understand how important it is to have this team work well so that the company can move efficiently. We will, you know, put our money behind your team.
And those people that you're supporting, like hands-on, they will support other people too, because they've learned something about the system and how it works. So ideally, they might become the person on their team that people go to with questions.
Yeah, it's actually
for us, like our support Slack channel, like at Twitch, it wasn't only our team answering questions. Like there were like all over the company, there's like engineers and designers and PMs and stuff who would get in there and answer other people's questions. And it just be like, it organically evolved into this thing where it's like, there were almost like champions of the design system throughout the company, as opposed to like just us having to answer questions all the time, which is really great.
I think this is actually a key concept. And yes, I was about to mention, like, you need to build champions basically, but in my perspective, the one thing that we, like at a certain scale, you need to always think about is actually support collaboration. So it's not just actually supporting directly people, but also, as you said, you know, it's like, how do you support champions? So then tomorrow, if they learn something, they can also give back, you know, and it's not just one way, it's actually two way, and they can contribute. One way to contribute is writing code or design, but another way is actually answering other people's questions, right? So this is actually, yes, something that we didn't mention, but is, I think, super important, is how do you support that contribution, but also reward it, right? It's like, hey, you're doing a great job helping us out, like answering questions. What can we do for that person to actually reward them one way or another, right? So that depends obviously on your company's culture, but I think there's definitely things that can be done there. Another point, and maybe we can stop on this, is that maybe for the people that don't necessarily see the value in support, I would say that, you know, like support is also a great way to create feedback loops and understand what is working, what is not working. If a component is just too complex and nobody gets it, or you named wrongly a prop and nobody understands what is this thing supposed to do. Like in my experience as a designer, when you don't have access directly to your users, the support is actually the best bet that you can go and talk to those people and say, what's up? What is the thing that you constantly have to solve for, right? So I think, you know, support is a great tool for feedback. And I would definitely encourage anybody to actually, you know, like do more of that, because it's not only you are helping, not only you're showing that there's a team behind the design system. It's not, you know, some people that you never meet in an ivory tower, but they're there to actually help you. I love what you said, Isha, about the fact that, you know, usually people working on design system are there to actually help others. But yeah, I think, you know, creating those kind of feedback loops is definitely critical, I think, for the success of your design team. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, that's great. I thought it was great. Great conversation.
This is a good therapy session, I feel.
As usual. Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you, Isha, for being with us. I hope you'll come back. The door is always open. And so I think that's it for today. Thanks, everybody, the numerous people watching us live today. I have the number, but I will not say. And as usual, stay fresh, cheese bags. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.